morning and welcome to Rising. We've got an excellent show for you today, jam-packed with terrific guests who are going to help us process what we have seen over the last few days as this increasingly becomes a Trump massive landslide victory for the Republicans.
A massive landslide, and we'll look into all sorts of aspects of that. And we've actually had some degree of sleep this time, so we should be in even finer spirits. So that's a good thing. So listen, let's get going. Robby, what's on your radar?
Happy to tell you. Now, the sheer impressiveness of Donald Trump's Election Day victory continues to grow, with the former president winning not just all the swing states, but the popular vote, the Senate. It's looking like maybe the House of Representatives as well. That's a lot. Trump will also exercise much greater control over his party than he did previously. The dissenters are gone. Make no mistake, this is an utter rout for the Democratic Party, one that will clear the way for the implementation of GOP policy goals on a scale hitherto undreamt of, at least since 2004. Democratic officials and pundits know that this is bad, though not all of them are willing to admit that the main fault lies with their candidate, Vice President Kamala Harris. If she does not deserve all the blame, it's only because she shares it with President Joe Biden, whose stubborn decision to seek re-election despite his advanced age and declining cognitive abilities compromised both of their candidacies. Now, various commentators have lashed out, not at Harris, but at you and me, at the American people. MSNBC's Joy Reid, for instance, maintained that Harris's campaign was historic and, quote, flawlessly run because Queen Latifah endorsed her. Seriously, let's watch.
This really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. She had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swiftie to the Swifties. She had the Beehive. You could not have run a better campaign in that short period of time. And I think that's still true.
With Queen Latifah and the Swifties, how could she lose? Kamala Harris did not fail the American people. The voters failed Kamala Harris. They also failed Queen Latifah, I suppose. The explanation that Harris lost because the voters are too racist to accept her will always have a certain amount of appeal among the progressive pundit class. Of course, this theory runs into obvious trouble. Harris seemingly lost ground with virtually every demographic, including Black and Latino voters. Now, as for the argument that the electorate is biased against women candidates, look, there may be some underlying truth to that. I don't deny that some level of racism and sexism does exist in all corners of the world. It would be strange if it didn't exist in America as well. But it's important to note that Harris lost even more spectacularly than Hillary Clinton. Did the voters become a lot more sexist in the last couple of years? That's not entirely persuasive to me. Maybe there is something else going on. So what is that other thing? Now, the explanation likely to receive star billing from progressives is an increasingly familiar one: social media misinformation. MSNBC host Jen Psaki cited the dangers of disinformation and propaganda on X, the site run by ardent Trump backer and advisor and billionaire Elon Musk, as a reason to fear Musk's influence over Trump. Earlier in the week, before she knew Harris would lose, Psaki advised Democrats to take action against social media companies in order to limit the lies that they can spread. The host of The View sounded a similar note on their post-election episode.
It would help if we could regulate social media, because one of the biggest offenders is D.C. and Congress have not been able to do one thing in regard to the rogue corporations of social media.
It would help if we could regulate social media, said Sarah Haynes. D.C. and Congress have not been able to do one thing in regard to the rogue corporations of social media. Now, it's true, of course it's true, that outright lies and conspiracy theories flourish on social media, though one can also consume bad information on television, on the radio, in print, in books, and during in-person conversation. Prestigious journalistic institutions make serious errors. For instance, more than 4 years later, Politico has not corrected a flagrantly misleading headline: Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intelligence officials say. You may have heard me bring this one up before. The laptop is not disinformation, and moreover, the intelligence officials did not claim that it was. They said it resembled Russian disinformation. Critics of the establishment progressive worldview, like myself, often call attention to the Hunter Biden laptop story because it is both a prominent example of the Democrats, national security experts, and media elites getting something wrong, and a prominent example of the concept of disinformation being wielded in bad faith. Civil libertarians are right to fear that the increasingly desperate calls to criminalize false information online or otherwise punish the platforms for not policing it effectively will result in the censorship of legitimate speech. It already has. The fact-checkers, disinformation watchdog organizations, and government agents have not proven themselves to be very adept at all at identifying actual disinfo. Calls from cable news pundits for government to do something to regulate social media more aggressively should be recognized as self-serving. Traditional media institutions recognize and resent that social media platforms are a boon to alternative, contrarian, libertarian perspectives. They allow independent writers, thinkers, and commentators to reach audiences without relying on legacy organizations. It's important to recognize that heavy-handed regulation of social media, something proposed by just as many Republicans and Democrats, by the way, would not merely reduce online misinformation, it would destroy the independent media ecosystem entirely. Provisions like Section 230, which protects social media companies from liability for user-generated content, allow the internet to function the way it does. Now, I say that's a good thing for the platforms, it's a good thing for free speech, and it's a good thing for contrarian perspectives. It's a bad thing for traditional media gatekeepers, and they know it. It's also striking to me that Democrats and media figures do not hesitate to denounce Trump's brazen and authoritarian tendencies, but fail to recognize that threatening, intimidating, and regulating social media companies until they agree to crack down on disfavored speech is itself an authoritarian action. Now, if Democrats really think they can't beat Trump unless they gut online speech protections, surveil social media companies, and deal a blow to the First Amendment, well, they should get used to the authoritarian moniker because that's how I'm going to describe them.
So listen, a lot of thoughts there, Robby.
I know, I'm in a spicy mood.
Yeah,
Hit me, Niall.
absolutely. And I have some points that I agree with and some I disagree with, as usual.
Well, that's why we love you.
Exactly. I think that in relation to the Harris thing and like, oh, how could someone lose because Queen Latifah endorsed them, is just like a manifestly ludicrous thing to say. And I think there is this tendency in liberal media quarters to just find excuses that overlook the obvious and find all sorts of nefarious reasons to as things that influence the media. I think that you and I have a principled disagreement on the topic of pushing back against whatever you want to call it, misinformation, which you think of as repressive and I think of as healthy in some ways. And the issue really, it gets down to whether, in Elon Musk's case, for example, you have a man who has personally spent more than $100 million in support of a particular candidate, who is also the literal owner of a major channel where people now get their information. Now, that doesn't mean that everything he puts out is false, but it does, I think, call into question this idea that he's simply providing a neutral platform upon which people express their views.
I do hear that, and I wish that he did not try, I've said this before, try to be both the referee and the coach of a player or the coach of one of the sides. It is striking to me how much whining and complaining there was for conservatives about Mark Zuckerberg's much less overt favoring of Democrats. And of course, Mark Zuckerberg ended up making an enemy, even more powerful enemy of Democrats for what reasons that I think are utterly not fair to him at all. But still on Elon's site, you can fact check. Look, I think obviously responding to and trying to correct actually false information is a good idea and is the job of journalists and is the job of features on social media platforms like Community Notes, which I love. I just don't think it should be done, and I don't think you really disagree with this, that we ought to be really careful if that's being done at the level of government and being done at the level of suppression. I think it should be left to actually the professionals, the journalists, who do get things wrong, as we point out all the time, and then they have other people checking them. One great community, I think this is the right place, I wanted to note it, great community note I saw yesterday from, that Alan Lichtman guy?
Yeah.
So that's the guy with
keys.
With the keys to determine who's going to win. And we actually had him on for an interview a couple weeks ago, and he just tore into Nate Silver. He has this feud with Nate Silver.
That's right, yeah.
Nate Silver, whose models are just much more accurate than Alan Lichtman's random guess, and he had so Alan Lichtman wrote on X. Unlike Nate Silver, who will try to squirm out of why he didn't see the election coming, I admit I was wrong. There's a community note immediately that goes, Nate Silver's model predicted a 50-50 possibility of Harris or Trump winning, and he wrote a piece in the New York Times 2 weeks ago saying he thought Trump would win.
That's great. I probably shouldn't give our viewers behind the curtain thing insights into the Hill.com inside, but we wanted to headline a piece on that forecaster on forecaster violence, which I wish we had done, but we thought better of it. Excellent. Look, I do think that the community notes thing can be useful. I just think that to me, there's a big separation between people genuinely expressing a view, even if that is a heterodox view or an independent view or an unpopular view, and people putting actual fake news in the sense of news that has been confected or invented. Mm-hmm. There was a suggestion this campaign of a purportedly Russian misinformation thing where they had a clip of a purportedly Haitian man who was claiming he had voted in multiple locations, and it was literally false. Like, it wasn't like a debatable point. It was like something that had been invented. I think in a situation where so many people get their news from social media, you have to figure out what is the appropriate thing to do about that kind of stuff without repressing people's right to free speech.
Well, we've got a lot more today on the show about the role of non-traditional media and podcasts in boosting Donald Trump, which he took full advantage of. Actually, Barron Trump, his son, was involved in the efforts to get him on with Theo Vaughn and all sorts of other people. Very interesting. We have John Krakauer on the show to talk about that. More Rising right after this.